Everyone, welcome to Peepo Coin channel. I sincerely hope that after watching this video you would subscribe. We have been discussing banks using XRP or possibly using it for years, and many people have questions because the most common question is, if all of these banks are using XRP or if all of these partnerships are taking place around these banks using XRP, why aren't there any official significant price action moves? Why don't the major banks, like JP Morgan, Bank of America, and others, tell us about these important partnerships? Not only will it be addressed in this video, but I also want to talk about a few other topics, such the increasing demand for ISO 2002, the use of cryptocurrency by large banks, DLT, and even the beginning of tokenizing some items. We will take care of all that. But I want to start with the major financial issue first. This is the notion that all of these large banks have already been touched. This brings us to the reason why banks have failed to disclose their cooperation with Ripple, despite everything being XRP. I have to admit that when I first saw this post, I assumed it would be clickbait or just hype, you know. However, after finishing the reading, I thought, this is really well written and it makes a lot of sense. Additionally, I believe it provides solutions to many of your questions. First, banks remain mute despite Ripple's legal battle coming to a conclusion. Why? Risk related to regulations. Compliance issues prevent them from moving forward until the SEC case is concluded. Let's examine their reasons for delaying. First, a legal limbo was created by the SEC's XRP lawsuit because the SEC claimed that Ripple had broken securities regulations by selling XRP. The legal standing of XRP was uncertain until the dispute was settled. Although a court decided that XRP is not a security in secondary markets, institutional sales were constituted securities, which is a crucial legal distinction that banks must carefully negotiate. As a result, banks could not risk participating in potentially illegal securities transactions. Uncertainty irritates banks. Announcements are impossible without clarity. Regulators demand that banks stay out of trouble with the law. Multiple regulators oversee U.S. banks, including the Federal Reserve, which stated that it is not holding banks back, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which also greenlighted banks, the FDIC, which recently also greenlighted banks, the SEC, which, although we do not currently have a green light from the SEC, we know that they have been very pro-crypto, so I do assume that we will see that green light at some point. However, we haven't heard anything from the FinCEN Financial Crimes Enforcement Network about the large banks, but I also believe that they will be on par with the Fed, the FDIC, and the OCC. Each of these organizations has specific responsibilities for new initiatives and fintech collaborations. Regulators require a thorough risk study prior to clearance if a bank works with an organization that is subject to legal scrutiny, such as Ripple. Banks are unable to reliably overcome these regulatory obstacles until the Ripple litigation is fully resolved. Crypto partnerships and OCC jobs need special approval. The OCC prohibited banks from participating in cryptocurrency activities in 2021 without first securing written consent. Banks must still exhibit robust risk management, compliance with all financial regulations, and zero exposure to legal infractions, even though the OCC relaxed its position in March of this year. A bank may be subject to harsh sanctions if it acts hastily on Ripple before complete regulatory clarification. AML and FinCEN scrutiny. Therefore, banks are required to prevent money laundering by the Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA, and the AML laws. Due to its failure to register as a money services company and its lack of appropriate AML procedures, FinCEN fined Ripple $700,000 in 2015 for BSA violations. Before forming extensive alliances, banks must make sure Ripple complies with all AML regulations. The bank can face fines, an investigation, or possibly the loss of its charter for only one mistake. Banks that handle third-party risk must carefully investigate Ripple. When banks collaborate with fintech companies, they exercise extraordinary caution. They have to thoroughly investigate Ripple's compliance history, make sure there are no legal obligations, which can be challenging when a company is facing SEC litigation. Show regulators that until all legal risks have been addressed, XRP transactions will not be regarded as securities offerings. Banks will hold off on declaring alliances, risk to regulatory reputation. No bank desires to take the lead. Consider the headlines. The SEC is investigating a major U.S. bank for its partnership with Ripple. Stability is more important to banks than innovation. Nobody wants to be the next bank targeted by the SEC. Banks will continue to test RippleNet gradually even after Ripple's court victory without making a public commitment to using XRP. When will banks make their Ripple partnerships public? Banks are currently having private discussions with Ripple, and once they are certain that regulators won't object, announcements will be made. This will happen after the SEC formally closes the case, regulatory clarity is obtained, banks receive explicit approval from the OCC, Fed, and FDIC, and Ripple's compliance controls satisfy AML and securities laws. Anticipate a gradual deployment rather than a sudden influx. In conclusion, banks are afraid about regulatory retaliation rather than Ripple's technology, and these are absolute realities. Since that is true, we have been concentrating on the regulatory aspect of things for a time. It is essential that all of this take place. Before announcing any collaborations with RippleNet or XRP, they are awaiting unwavering legal clarification. Uncertainty resulted from the SEC lawsuit. Banks remain motionless until danger is nil. Banks will carefully re-engage now that Ripple's legal battle is coming to a close. Prior to public announcements, anticipate private pilots. Timelines are determined by regulations and compliance is paramount in the banking industry. In addition to all of this, well, let's move on to the next phase, which I know you guys will claim will take a very long time. I don't think so. When it comes to regulations and regulatory clarity in the area, this administrator is, speeding things up. I contend that during the upcoming year, regulatory certainty need to be achieved, and I say it with confidence because of the guidelines that major players like the FSB with the Bs and the G20 have released. These are really big players, don't you think? They have provided us with a schedule to adhere to, and they are disseminating the guidelines throughout the area. The next 12 months seem to be crucial for keeping an eye on things to not only develop significantly, but also for removing the barriers that big banks need to not just announce but also access and use digital assets. We now consider ISO 2002 in addition to that. Anderson deserves a lot of credit for this. Here is a lengthy message about ISO 2002 from Bob Way, a former employee of Ripple. He is most likely the one you should listen to. He claims that Ripple's bank sales benefit greatly from the ISO 222 migration for cross-border payments. You see how the stars are aligning, don't you? Even if the phrase Ripple Nets may not be officially used longer, it will be quite simple to incorporate once all SWIFT institutions have switched to ISO 222. If the migration is not postponed, it will be completed in November 2025. Simultaneously, the Ripple v. SEC case is coming to a complete conclusion, and Ripple has complete clarity on XRP. In a few months, the U.S. is expected to approve legislation pertaining to stablecoins and the cryptocurrency market. The U.S. now allows banks to hold cryptocurrency, which will be very beneficial for Ripple's custody. Seeing all of this at once is incredible. Indeed, on this channel, I have been quite outspoken about this topic. Everything is beginning to come together, I understand. You're all frustrated, we're irritated, our goal is to retire. We all desire to be financially independent, but achieving this goal is difficult and takes time. At the end of the day, these are still investments, so keep that in mind. They are simply waiting for us to cash in. They aren't lottery tickets, These are all important components of the puzzle when considering what is truly taking place here. In 2004, ISO 22 was announced. It's being implemented in 2025. Although these things take time, Bob Way has a rationale for this. The bank sales staff at Ripple finds the change to be quite beneficial. This implies that all banks must adopt new technology. Banks detest altering an established procedure. Bankers may lose their jobs as a result of new issues brought about by change. Furthermore, this is the main reason why the majority of bank integrations fail.